a boss, presumably we'll find someone who's very far to the right in this diagram. So you might put a line of best fit through these points. Something like that. The slope of this line, the gradient, is how much consumption rises when income goes up by 1. So that slope is the marginal propensity to consume. Now, why am I here? Why am I not spending all of my income? Well, I need to. In my case, I need to buy a house in London, and I need a lot of money for that, given how high house prices are in London. But there's also my retirement at some hopefully distant point in the future. So I save. When I was a student, I anticipated having a job in the future, and I was willing to borrow, so I consumed more than my income. So really, you could think of these differences between us as due to life cycle factors. But there's probably more to it than that. Some people might have a preference to work now. They might really want to consume, have a little bit more income than they can get from borrowing. So some of you might have jobs, some of you might not. It could depend on a whole range of special factors where you are in this diagram. Some of those might be temporary factors. Some of you might just not have found a job yet. You might be looking for one. So there could be a whole range of special temporary factors why we are where we are in this picture. So why is it then that the line I've drawn through these points is flatter than the 45-degree line? Well, it's simply that those differences in our incomes are not going to be permanent differences over our entire lives. That if you are down here now, you're going to anticipate being somewhere else in the future, and you're borrowing against that future income. People over here in the diagram anticipate they're going to be retired in the future, they anticipate a lower labour income, so they don't consume at all. As a result, because a lot of this income variation across this group of people is not permanent, you don't consume at all if you make a rational consumption decision like you do in the Fisher model. So that's the typical pattern you might see in the cross-section. Now, what's a time series? Cross-section is many people at the same point in time. Time series is one object, could be a person, could be an economy, observed at many points in time. And typically when we say time series data in macroeconomics, we're referring to data for the whole economy tracked over time. So that might be taking the average of everyone in this room, for instance, and then looking at how our incomes on average are changing over time. But now we do that for the whole economy. We take the average of everyone, look at how that changes over time. So what might be different in terms of what we would see in the different data points where they are on the horizontal axis? So let's take the case of Singapore. If only because the time series, I guess, for Singapore is quite dramatic. That if you went back many decades, income here on average is very low. If you go back, I guess, to the 1950s and 60s, income would have been pretty low here. GDP would be pretty low. By no means the worst in the world, but pretty low. Whereas if you look at it now, it's one of the highest in the world per capita. So we've got a lot of variation in the last 5 or 6 decades in the time series for Singapore. So you might get data points back here, say the 1950s, and where we are now might be up here. So back then, income was low and consumption was low. Now, income is high and consumption is high. Now, this won't fall exactly on a 45-degree line, but they'll probably be pretty close to it. You have all the intervening years somewhere on this graph. If you do the scatter plot, that's roughly speaking what you're going to find. I haven't done this for Singapore, but if you do this for most countries, these points typically stack up not too far away from a 45-degree line. So the marginal propensity to consume, the gradient of the line of best fit through these points is around 1. Now, why is that? Presumably, people in Singapore don't now ever anticipate income going back to where it was in the 1950s. Presumably because the economic progress that's happened between now and then is seen to be permanent. It's not that you've made an income gain that you anticipate losing at some point in the future. So the trajectory of a whole country is different from the trajectory of particular individuals or families. Here, a lot of the variation is temporary in income. You or I are different at different points in life cycles. We anticipate that if you're low income today, you might catch up with people with high income in the future. Those with high income now might fall back. It could be the life cycle, it could be luck. It could be bad luck makes your income low, good luck makes your income high. Maybe that won't persist over your entire life. Whereas for countries, most of the advantages that high income countries have gained, no one really thinks they're going to lose that to become low income countries in the future. So these variation in income we see in the time series, that's perceived to be permanent. Whereas what we see in the cross-section is not completely, but is quite, in many cases, closer to being temporary variation. So here the variation is not all temporary. We can say a lot of it is temporary. Whereas in the time series, variation in income, again, it's not as though it's all permanent. Economies have ups and downs. So a boom is not perceived to be permanent. No one, if they think the economy grows faster than what you think the trend is, expects that to go on forever. If you have a recession, people don't expect the recession to go on forever. There are ups and downs. But most of the variation in income, especially if you look over a long period of time, over many decades, much of the variation there is due to long-run growth. And you don't expect that to be reversed. So much variation, much of it is permanent. So these patterns are consistent with the Fisher model of consumption, because the Fisher model of consumption tells you that the marginal propensity to consume is different when income variation is temporary compared to where it's permanent. We've already seen that the Fisher model tells you that the marginal propensity to consume is less than 1 for a temporary change in income. If you work through it, you would consider the case of a permanent change in income using the Fisher model. Let me just show you briefly what that diagram looks like. Or in fact, let me get you to do it, would be better. So draw a Fisher diagram. here we're not going to worry about taxes and government spending. Let's always make the question as easy as you possibly can. So let's just forget about taxes here. Suppose we have income Y1, current income Y1, future income Y2. Here's your consumption choice. Suppose income goes up permanently. What does that mean? It means both Y1 and Y2 change by roughly the same amount. What will happen in this diagram?